excited to introduce my friend Eric. Eric and I met at a Institute of Coaching conference and a couple of conferences ago, and I haven't told you this, Eric, but I was just really taken by just how I just felt your heart. I don't know, it sounds kind of corny way to say it, but I just felt like like who you were. I felt a courageousness and a compassion. And like, I just thought I need an excuse to stay in contact with this guy. And so I made this up. So for a more formal introduction of Eric, Eric is an executive coach. He's an author. He's a keynote speaker. 19 years ago, Eric quit his corporate gig to form an executive development consultancy. He describes his work as an unrelenting commitment to results and an unyielding regard for the human spirit. Eric's the author of the book, 4 Virtues of a Leader. He's a fellow and thought leader for the Institute of Coaching at Harvard. He's a former Vistage chair and a TEDx speaker. So welcome, Eric. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Alison. I'm honored. I'm excited, and I'm really grateful to have a space to talk about this conscious leadership construct and practice. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, glad you're here. So we got more signups for this Podinar faster than any other we've done, and we've done quite a few. And I'm curious, like, what's your sense of what it is about this idea? Like, people don't even know what it is. I had never heard of it before you, but what do you think the sense is of this, like what we think conscious leadership might be that attracts people?
So if we look at the arc of history, human beings have always been shaped by the cultural and sort of social and environmental conditions that we have been in, right? So if we had the hunter-gatherers, the leadership was done in a particular way. It was very distributed. Men and women had equal roles because everybody had to be all hands on deck to survive as a hunter-gatherer, right? Then we went into sort of farming, and it changed the nature of society. It changed the nature of leadership, and then we went, farming became city-states that gave rise to mass production. Then we started having armies and military. Of course, at some point, religion comes in there, and so we're shaped by as much as we're shaping society and culture and society and environment shapes us as humans. We are at a time in history that is another inflection point, right? There's something different that's been happening, and it's been happening since before World War II, where the globalization of markets and economies, the rise of the business class, not just on airplanes, but I mean sort of the whole idea of commerce and business, global trade, multinational corporations. We've had a concomitant sort of decline of the power of religion and a flattening of the sort of authority of government. So what we've had over the years is government is not reducing, but we have suspicion around government. Right? We have some sort of antagonistic push and pull with government often. Religion has lost its shining sort of moral star, and business has risen to be de facto the shapers of society. Business and business leaders, commerce, commercial thinking has become the shapers of society. So now we have a situation where business leaders are unprepared and often unaware of the role that they're playing as shapers of societies, not just leaders of business, but leaders of humanity. And so if we don't have government and we don't have religion and we have business, then, oh my God, how is business going to take care of me? Where it was inherently invented as a profit-driven motive to make the most for the owners and not necessarily to care for society. And so conscious leadership is not so much a desire as a felt sense. We need our leaders to step up, step into, tune into, and really embrace the inevitable role that they didn't sign up for. And so that is what I believe, and I'll give you a real quick example. So that we have the terrible spate of shootings in the United States after the high school in Florida. I'm blanking on the name. I'm sorry.
Sandy Hook? No, that's up north. Uh,
It was this.
yeah,
My deepest apologies. I can't recall the name.
yeah. Sorry, someone will chat it to us.
After the shooting, there was this great outcry about, the power of the NRA and this kind of the de facto notion that guns are birthright, and there's been this sort of let's review our relationship with violent weapons, and the government didn't do anything about it, and the religions didn't do anything about it. You know who did something about it? Delta Airlines, Walmart, Dick's Sporting Goods. Those are examples. I'm not saying those are like shining examples of conscious leadership, but it is a shining example of the transfer of moral authority into the hands of business leaders. And conscious leadership, in effect, is how can we do what I describe in my work, right? Is an unrelenting commitment to results, kick butt, get shit done, be successful, with an unyielding regard for the human spirit. It's not an either or proposition, it's a both and, but the both and is not something we've practiced. And so now it's requisite.
Mm-hmm. So appreciate that context, and it feels so, Guy, I feel really empowered by what you just said. So I've coached CEOs for a long, long time, for 15 years, small to medium-sized businesses, and I haven't put my work in that context, and I feel so much more, I don't know, maybe emboldened to coach my clients maybe differently. So I really appreciate that. So when you think of consciousness in the context of conscious leadership, how do you define that?
Are you asking like what is conscious leadership, or specifically what is conscious?
No, like conscious has so many different meanings.
Yeah.
Like, so when you think of the word conscious,
yeah,
what does that mean?
I'm going to do a coaching mind trick and sort of respond with a question.
Okay. Okay.
My daughter, by the way, has flat out forbade me from doing that anymore. The last time I had a conversation, she's now 18, so this was a couple of years ago. She says, "Look, I have a question for you, and I just want you to give me an answer."
Just tell me, Dad.
And I said, "And why would you want me to do that?" She goes, "Oh my God, you can't."
Oh my God.
But it's more rhetorical. I think I was thinking about, and I've mentioned it to you before, but I was thinking about, like, why do you put so much effort into this Podinar? And for those folks who are on the Podinar that don't have the background experience, I was saying, I have such great respect for the way you're doing it. There was a trial run, there's a whole host of emails, you're doing the research, you've got 4 people on it, right? And not just me and you, but you got people who are taking care of different things. And so there's preparation, and there's attention, and there's people. And I think part of the reason you do that, I didn't ask you, but I'm sort of, imagining, is because you want to prevent mishaps, right? What you want is you want it to go real smoothly so you can provide value to folks. So you want to create an environment where you and I can really be attentive and focused, and therefore bring the best of ourselves forth so that people can gain the most from the exchange. You want to minimize the unexpected, the disruptive inevitability of things that will happen. Is that sort of fair?
Yes, that's very fair.
And so you do this in order to be able to do a few things: pay deep attention, provide value and service, and to the degree that you can, deal with uncertainty, right? Or prepare for the uncertainty. And I think that is one of the things that's so important to me about this whole notion of conscious leadership. Life is fraught with uncertainty. That is not like a philosophical statement. That is a fact, right? Life is fraught with uncertainty. In fact, we have a joke, and we say, what do we say? The only certain things in life are death and taxes, right? And so, okay, I'm not going to talk about death, about taxes, but I am going to die. My wife is going to die. My children are going to die. Everybody who I love is going to die. We're all going to die. And I don't know when, but I know for certain it will happen. And actually, it hurts my heart to say that out loud. It pains me to admit that. And we spend a lifetime essentially wanting to avoid, deny, and deflect that reality. And I'm not saying this is some kind of a depressive, existential, hopeless statement. I'm saying this because facing our mortality, the fact that we're going to die, facing, and with that, the uncertainty of life is really a significant part of what it means to awaken to being conscious, right? And to awaken to being a leader. And by the way, leadership is fraught with uncertainty. In effect, the more senior you are in the organization, the more intimate you are with the fact of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what I'd like to say here is, you know, my life is not a dress rehearsal. There ain't no second chance. We don't get a, what is called like a do-over button. You know, I don't get to do it again. This is our one chance to do the best we have and to be the best we can be and to provide the most that we can. And I mention this as an invitation to myself and as an invitation to everyone else to seriously commit to this reality. And so as part of the leadership role, it's about producing amazing results and having a great life and doing all things that are a privilege and a value and a gift and a joy. But it also is an invitation, so here I am as to what is a conscious leader, right? Embracing the inevitability of uncertainty and facing the undeniable element of death. What does it mean to move from being self-centered to being life-centered? And I think that's where the conscious leadership becomes like the really interesting game, right? How do I move from, and it's not like either or, it's in the language of spiral dynamics, it's transcend and include. Right? How do I include the self-centered impulse, which is impossible for me to erase, and transcend that into a life-centered way of being? And I think conscious leadership at its very sort of heart is engaging in a life-centered perspective. Mm. So serving not only the mission and the board and the values of the stakeholders, but serving life as part of our journey of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel that. So tell us, what is conscious leadership?
I think about it in the simplest terms as, I think about leadership as organizing and influencing people to achieve meaningful results. That's my sort of shortest definition, most succinct definition of what leadership is. It's organizing and influencing people to achieve meaningful results. Conscious leadership then is organizing and influencing people to achieve meaningful results while respecting that this is the only life we have, and so therefore engaging with curiosity and with compassion and with boldness. So it's organizing and influencing people to achieve meaningful results and doing so with curiosity, compassion, and boldness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So say more, you talk in the, and by the way, there's a great article that Eric has done on this. And in fact, Chris, if you have the chance to put that in the chat box for people to link to, would be awesome.
Hopefully they link to it after the conversation.
Yes. Okay, you're right. Don't do that. We will send you a link to it in the follow-up. Thanks. That's much better. Where you talk about what conscious leadership is, and you talk about this idea of a triune intelligence and 3 pillars of consciousness. Will you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. So traditions, perhaps we can call them wisdom traditions, right? Across the globe and across time, have long identified that there are sort of 3 pillars to much of our life. I mean, in Hebraic, Judaic tradition, it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? The Christian tradition, you got the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Hindus have Krishna, Vishnu, and Brahma. The Taoists have Jin, Jin, and Shen. In Zen tradition, there are sort of mindfulness practices, loving kindness practices, and hara practices, right? There are 3 kind of traditions of practice, and I think that this triune intelligence now in modern medicine, there's actually some very, very clear and compelling, remarkable evidence of actually 3 centers of intelligence. Actually, if we say intelligence, is because we have neural pathways that can communicate, store information, memory, and make decisions. If that's an intelligence, there is the sort of the head brain, the cephalic brain, right, with I think it's 100 billion cells or 100 trillion, I forget right now, but lots of cells. Sometimes they're more fired up than others. There's a there are actual neural cells, brain cells in the heart, and there are neural cells in the gut. As a matter of fact, we have as many neural cells in the gut, almost as many neural cells as a cat has in its brain. That's a lot. So when we talk about a gut sense or a heartfelt or a head, those are sort of three centers of intelligence, and the pillars. As I've looked at all these traditions across time and throughout the different places, and have studied them both sort of in an academic way, but also in an experiential way. I've practiced with them. I've seen this kind of triune element that I've come to call wisdom, love, and courage. And I think that the practice of awakening and attuning and aligning these elements of wisdom, love, and courage is the process of sort of raising consciousness. And in particular, as we bring wisdom, love, and courage into our leadership, now we have a way to practice conscious leadership. So it's not one or the other. And I'm sort of at the danger of a beginning of an early soapbox here. What we have really lauded and have prioritized is our wisdom. Right, the head tradition, the intellect, the analysis, the capacity for perspective and vision and planning and problem solving. I think our traditions, and particularly more in the progressive movement, folks, and even in many spiritual, religious traditions, awakening the heart and being compassionate has come into being. We haven't actually learned how to bring online the full sense of being rooted into the courage aspect, right? That's sort of the third element as an informing and connecting element of all three. And so I find that a lot of us are not aligned, and so we can't bring the full presence into our work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So Tommy Glover asked a question in advance about how you balance those three intelligences. And how you know if you're, I'm adding this part, like how do you know if you're strong in one and weaker in others?
So I think the notion of balance is it's a little limiting. And I'll say what I mean by limiting. I think, so if I think of balance as like the balance of nature, for example, right? So there's a notion of the balance of nature, like the ecosystem is somehow self-correcting, and that if too many deer appear in this ecosystem, then which is one shift of the balance, then there'll be a corrective balance by way of more wolves showing up to eat the deer, right? Now the reality is that science has debunked that. There is no actual balance, because balance insinuates either an equilibrium or homeostasis. Right? Neither of those are actual sustainable states in nature or in humans. There's no sustainable equilibrium, no sustainable homeostasis. It's movement around and about it, right? So what we really have is chaos sort of playing out, and this chaos theory is far more modern than balance of nature kind of theory, right? And so the reason I bring it up is if in fact that's what Tommy meant by balance, and I don't have the good fortune of actually engaging with her to ask the question more deeply. I think it's a her. If it's a him, I'm sorry. What we're looking for really is not equilibrium, but rather alignment and range, right? So I want to be able to awaken these three elements, right? My wisdom, my love, and my courage, and then dynamically, either proactively or reactively, remain in contact. This is what I mean by life-centered, right? Part of what life-centered means is that I have a deep capacity to listen into what is happening within me, around me, and beyond me, right? And so if I'm in a team situation, and I find that we are lingering too long on a decision because it's uncomfortable and awkward, that's when I say, okay, let me bring more courage online right now and press forward towards the discomfort, right? I've used my wisdom to do the analysis. I've used my heart to make sure we're connected. And really now it's not a matter of balance, it's a matter of priority. Now, courage, boldness, a little ferocity has to come online to move into what needs to be moved to. Or I can be in a situation where I'm coaching somebody and I'm feeling them really, intense, and they're driving and they're feeling really good about what they're doing, but I have the sense that they haven't thought it all the way through, right? So I'm going to say, okay, let's downshift the courage element and kind of upshift okay, what do we need to do to think this through as wisely as we can from as many perspectives as we can? And so I hope I'm answering the question.
Yeah, I mean, what I took from it, let me know if
it's not an even scale as much as it's a dynamic flow. And part of, I think, what conscious is being aware of what does life want of me right now? How can I be in flow and lock into the energy that is required of me to fulfill the Gestalt experience that's happening within and around me?
Yeah, yeah. What comes up for me is a friend of mine, Jen Rybeck, said at a meeting we had of the IOC Roundtable here locally in DC, when we were talking about questions we ask ourselves. And one of the questions she asked herself is like, what is this situation calling for me now? Like, what is this situation asking for from me? And that's what I hear in like, is this asking for me courage? Is this asking for more head? Is it asking for something else? So yeah, so I've got one more question, then we're going to go to Chris to hear questions and what the audience is chatting about. So Jude Rosenberg asked a question around like, how is conscious leadership different? What's the value add? Like, how is it different than servant leadership or adaptive leadership or all these other forms of leadership you hear about?
So let me think about this. Ask me again. Sorry. So how is it different than those other ones? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. How is conscious leadership unique from what we hear about, whether it's servant leadership or situational leadership or adaptive leadership? Like what's unique about it?
What comes up for me, Alison, is that I'm kind of inclined to reframe it from what's the value add, sort of how's it different to how's it additive? That's what I'm really focused on. How is it additive? How does it add to these other pieces, whether it's servant leadership or situational leadership? And I think that there are, how can it help evolve and add more context and nuance and effectiveness to the familiar leadership model? Because it's not against or denying those other models, right? It's additive. There are, let me see how I can make sense of that. So there are kind of three levels of relationship that we operate in, right? And I'll say them, there's intrapersonal, that's a relationship within myself with myself. There's interpersonal, right? There's the relationship that you and I, either individually or you and I collectively, I'm relating to a person or a community. And there's this transpersonal relationship, right? The relationship that I have with that which is beyond the individual or the collective. So intrapersonal, interpersonal, transpersonal. Something like, emotional intelligence or situational leadership, or, emotional intelligence, for example, begins with intrapersonal, right? Self-awareness, self-management, and then goes to interpersonal, right? Other awareness of other and relationship management. Situational leadership is almost entirely interpersonal, right? What's happening with them and how do I best serve wherever they are in their developmental mode and so forth. I think that in particular, as I've mentioned already, what conscious leadership adds is that transpersonal. And it's transcend and include. It's not against or without, but it's transcend and include. So it includes the intrapersonal. Part of being conscious is being self-aware. Your emotional intelligence is, I think, some of your bread and butter. It's hugely important. Some of consciousness is then aware of others and relating with others. And part of consciousness is then aware of life, or what is the situation calling for. And I think where we falter is where we think that it begins and ends in the skin suit or the meat suit that we're wearing as an individual entity. And where we thrive is where we recognize the fundamental interconnectedness of all things in the universe, including all people. And when we can bring that fundamental sense of interconnectedness on top of the actual interpersonal and the internal, we now have some really profound, interesting types of leadership opportunities, right? And and it's moving from a self-centered, even interpersonal, still self-centered. It's how do I relate to you? What do you want? But how do you view me? I mean, how much of our time is spent in sort of perception management, right? How much of our time is spent in what do they think about me? And I'm not going to say it because how does it feel? And oh, did I come off well in that? Am I going to have another opportunity? Did they like me? It's so self-centered, right? That doesn't go away. But there's another dimension we can add. What does life want, right? What is it that I need to bring up to the team now that's not comfortable to me, but will serve because that's what the team energy, that's what the team pulse requires. So that's where I think it's additive and enhancing rather than sort of unique or different. It's more, it's bigger.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hear it. Okay, so I'm loving how you're describing conscious leadership, this idea of interpersonal, transpersonal, this idea of leaders, us asking for what's needed now. So that sounds awesome. So what gets in the way? Like, why don't we all do this?
I can talk about, there's several things that get in the way, right? One of the obvious things that gets in the way is just the human condition. The human condition, I write in my book about fear is the basic mood of the ego. The ego, in effect, is this construct that I hold and we hold as the fixed finite self, right? So my ego is Latin for the word I, right? So I am this, right? My values and assumptions and beliefs, I take that to be me, and it gets in the way because that has a sense of limited capacity, and therefore, and I talk about kind of the inevitability of death. We just don't want to deal with the expansiveness and the uncertainty of it. We just want to be safe and secure in our own state of self, right? So that's one. Another thing that gets in the way is just social constructs and cultural behavior, right? My kids are now, I guess my daughter turned 16, my younger daughter turned 16 on Saturday, and my
nice.
Next month. So we'll call them 18 and 16. I've been real present to them going through the school system, and we are educating little children to wonderful things like self-reliance and intellect and problem solving, but we're also educating them to break away from their sense of connectedness and compassion and in sort of interdependence and really be more individual. So the grades I get are my reflection, right? And the relationship with my teacher is my reflection. And whether or not I'm going to be sort of a white robe graduate at the end of high school because I got 4.0, it's my work. So there's me, my, I. And we're reinforcing constantly this separated individual. And I think that it takes time and practice to rise above that, as it were, right? To transcend and include. Yes, I'm the individual and more. There's a couple other things. You want me to throw in some other sort of what gets in the way?
Yeah, I'd love to. One,
and this is for the people who are already on the path. When I start getting into the belief that I'm already conscious, I'm screwed.
Yeah, right. That's just, I had that conversation with a client on Monday. Oh, goodness. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's as soon as we start convincing ourselves how conscious we are, we've sort of lost the thread, lost the trail, right? So
yeah. My client was yelling at me about how healthy he is. I'm like, well,
yeah.
The fact that you're trying to kind of convince me and that you're angry about it kind of flies in the face of that, you think?
I think the sort of the antidote with that would be to just be really humble, right? To be very much a sort of always in a kind of in a student mindset, a beginner mind, right? The other thing that gets in the way is some of these, there's social efforts like, what's the expression? I think it's in New Zealand or Australia. It's called the tall poppy syndrome. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't know that.
It's either New Zealand or Australia, and I forget which one, and I apologize to whichever country I'm not attributing appropriately. But the tall poppy syndrome is this idea that if you're the poppy in the field that stick out, they'll cut you down so that you can fit in with all the other poppies.
Right.
And so I think that there's this powerful urge for us to participate and conform and be part of. And I think part of what consciousness requires of us is a smidge of rebellion, right? I truly believe that rebellion is the seed of enlightenment. And I'm not talking about rebellion as a force of just, screw you, I'm going to tear everything down and destroy it. But I mean rebellion as this internal inclination to push against the assumptions of what's true and real. And I think that to the degree that we're willing to push against those, the sort of the inherently obvious fabrics of narrative that we grew up in, if we don't push against it, we'll only remain at the level of consciousness that we are brought into and born into and raised in. And so I think that there's an inherent drive towards conformity. Again, if I go back to the school system, my girls have done fantastically academically, but their struggles have primarily been social, as most children are. And most of those social struggles are about conformity and fitting in. And I think that part of what consciousness requires of us is to break beyond and be nonconformists. And so I think the folks who are willing to take some risk and rebel are going to inherently see more and know more than what was available to them before. Or I'll just quote Einstein, who said that a problem cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness that created it. Right? We've got to pop aside from or away from the familiar. And I'll give you one more just because you asked. I mean, I have several, right? But one is kind of a corollary to that, right? Is what could really get away from a leadership perspective is trying to make people happy. And we have made a freaking, not me personally, but there's a profitable industry around the science of happiness. And we have somehow bought into what I believe is a fallacious notion that we deserve to be happy and that happiness can be acquired given the right circumstances. And so then
that happiness should be the goal.
And then happiness, yeah, we deserve it. It's the goal. That's the ultimate achievement of a human life is happiness. And I've really encouraged people to review that and look at that differently. I think it's a bullshit commercial effort. And I think that what it paves the way for is a remarkable amount of money to be made by people who are proffering happiness. I'm not saying life should be sad. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying happiness comes and goes just like tooth pain, just like hunger. You know, who is considered the wisest man in the Western tradition, biblically speaking? Who was the wisest man in the Bible?
I don't know.
You didn't read the Bible? Solomon.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Solomon, right?
I was going to say Moses, but no. Actually,
Moses.
not so much.
No, Solomon, right?
Yeah.
Solomon's considered the wisest man in history. Now the story goes, he had a ring, and inscribed on the inside of his ring was a statement that says, "This too shall pass." So the wisest man in biblical time had a simple formula that says, "This too shall pass," which means even happiness passes. So does sadness.
Mm-hmm.
So does loneliness. So does ecstasy. Everything passes. And I think that if we're trying to make people happy, we're creating this artificial construct of really, hedonistic exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can settle in as leaders to help people really be present to, be mindful of, learn to live in and reside in reality as it is, now we're moving beyond happiness to contentment. Contentment's available. But contentment doesn't always feel good. It just means I accept what is.
Accept what is. Mm-hmm. I love that definition of contentment. I think some of the people I work with, when we talk about contentment, they interestingly resist that notion, that contentment could be a desired state because they see it as not striving, giving in. They equate content with complacent.
Yes, I hear that a lot, right? Contentment with complacency or resignation, right? I mean, it's one of the sort of ways that we've butchered "it is what it is," kind of this profound, deep Buddhist teaching of embracing reality as it is. Yatha bhuta, the Buddha would say, yatha bhuta, reality as it is. And now we go, screw it is what it is, I can't do anything about it. That's not at all the same thing. You know, similarly, contentment is not resignation or complacency. Contentment is being able to find deep joy in the present moment, regardless of what it is, right? So can I be content when I'm fighting with my wife? It's hard. That's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'll be married 20 years in March. Last week we had, a pretty robust disagreement. I was very diligently trying to find my contentment in that disagreement.
Yeah, how'd that go?
What I came to is that I was able to be in disagreement with her with all the energy that happens in the body, right? And if I stayed away from making bigger stories around it and going into the future and the past, and therefore making explanations about who I am, who I'm not, or who she is, or who she's not, but just stayed in the energy of that frustration and anger and disconnect, it's not inherently bad, but it is unpleasant.
Yeah.
So it also allows me to stay really present with her in the experience and with myself in the experience, and therefore move through it a lot faster.
Yeah, right. There's less resistance to what is.
Yeah.
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 So what are some examples? We've talked a little bit about the theory of conscious leadership, some of the attributes of conscious leadership and consciousness itself, and what gets in the way. What does conscious leadership look like when it's embodied by a leader?
It can look different ways depending on different leaders, for sure, in different situations. So let me give you an example. Matt, CEO of a very successful company, a family business. His parents started it, he's been running it for 20 some years now. So he's shaped this company and grew it. One of the practices they have is that they were giving sort of loans to employees, small loans that I think it was 0% interest, but it was like financial aid, as it were, for employees, especially because the manufacturing side of the business, employees, it was really helpful to them to have a safe and caring source for loans.
Because some may be doing payday loans anyway with people who aren't safe.
With sharks.
So they made something that might have already been taking place safe. Yeah. So it's very conscious in itself.
It's very cool. And part of the way they set it up is the person taking the loan would have to go through and sort of write a narrative of what the money's going to be used for, and then they had to also come up with a bit of a financial plan on how they're going to pay it back. So there's an educational component. And there was a woman, I remember particularly, there was a woman that, one of the employees who had asked for a loan. Her mom was sick. She's one of 5 siblings. She couldn't quite get to the family. And when she got through all the paperwork, Matt turned her down. And she was kind of blown away. And I asked him, so why did you turn her down? She clearly needed the money. And essentially, he took time to really engage with this woman in the manufacturing capacity. He recognized a couple of things. 1, she was undereducated. 2, she was underutilized. And 3, she had skills, actual skills that were not being leveraged to make her more successful in her own right. So rather than give her the loan, he set her up for some training, some education, some coaching. He helped her get in touch with what it is she was actually trying to accomplish with the money, which was she wanted to send money because she didn't want to actually go there physically and deal with her mother. And so he really helped her. So here's Matt, right, using his wisdom, saying, I see something here. So wisdom to me is going below the surface and beyond the obvious. I'm seeing something here that is underutilized. Let me help you see it the way I see it. He cared. He was real compassionate. And as his compassion said, I'm not just going to let you do it because it's underutilizing you. And he took action, which seemed courageous, right? No, I'm not going to give it to you, even though it seems like you're the obvious candidate. And then he engaged with her to help her earn the money in a more sustainable way. So that's conscious leadership, right? Matt's putting himself online. He's listening, he's attending, he's giving, he's using his wisdom, he's using his love, and he's using his courage. I can think of Kelly is a vice president of a large company. Conscious leadership for her is very intentionally and very deliberately slowing down. She's a super high energy, wildly intelligent woman who's successful in every way, but she gets really focused on slowing down so that she can bring her whole self to a human being in front of her and really engage with them and see not only what they say they want, but what emerges as the real need if she slows down long enough to bring her full self to the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So she has, she's one of those leaders that through her department have come so many people who have been promoted. It's one of these great examples of a leader of leaders, right? Somebody who not only does great work on their own, but in their presence, other people unfold and shine. And she does that specifically. She listens very intensely. She cares deeply, and she's willing to go directly towards what other people would run away from, right? She's courageous in that way. And people flourish around her. They absolutely explode into their full potential. They move on to go to other places. And by the way, she has a giant network of fans and allies who will do anything for her. So if you ask what is the value of conscious leadership, it's not only that you get more done, but you get more people to get more done.
Mm-hmm. You know what I'm appreciating about your descriptions, I've always thought of the workplace as this ideal shaping ground by which we kind of learn to kind of rub off the rough edges of ourselves, like these stones that are kind of roll over each other, when we can live and be together in honest feedback, that we can kind of like grow into a fuller, more relative expression of ourselves. And what you're adding on top of that is this idea that the leader has the opportunity, maybe the responsibility, to hold the space for their people to grow into a fullness of themselves. And that the workplace can be a place of becoming and belonging, where we find this place of full expression and connectedness.
The Gallup poll, you kind of make me think about that, right? When they ask about the
Q12.
Right? One of the questions is, do I have friends at work? Is there an opportunity to grow at work? And what they've identified over the years as the premier, the number one predictor of engagement in the workplace is a positive relationship with your supervisor, with your direct boss. And I think that we know that when my boss is somebody with whom I don't have a good relationship, it's not only the quality of my work that suffers, it's my experience in life that really is affected by it, because we are relational creatures. And I don't think leaders have like a spiritual responsibility to make people better. I think that's sort of like trying to make people happy. But I love the way you describe it. I think part of what we can do as coaches with leaders, and what leaders can bring into their work, is holding a space within which this is possible. And I think that capacity to be conscious, which is to be aware, right? There's a wisdom and a curiosity and an awareness. There's a care and a compassion and a love, and then there's a boldness and a ferocity and an action orientation. And when we can bring all those into dynamic flow with one another, we do create an environment where other people do that as well. Right? And so rather than me have to do something for them, if I create a space where wisdom, love, and courage are the guiding principles, well, then that awakens and emboldens that in others as well. And so you don't have to coach me to be better. I can watch you, and by inspiration, become more courageous, right? Or settle into more of a heart-based care and love way of being.
Okay, we're going to launch a poll, and we want to hear from everyone here to find out where you feel you are on your conscious leadership journey personally. So we'll get a sense for where people feel like they are. Feel free to view the questions and vote from there. So, Eric, how did you personally come to conscious leadership?
See, can I close this poll on my screen? Ah, there you are. Okay. You don't know what I can do on my screen. I came to it by way of a combination of two paths, kind of a work, a college work, corporate path, and a spiritual practice path. And the two were sort of parallel for a while, then united, then crossed over, then get united again. So I I came to the United States as an international student. So I came here to go to college. My first year in college was a remarkable educational experience that had no grades, so they kicked me out of college. I learned a lot about Grateful Dead. I learned a lot about mushrooms and acid and the remarkable partying capacity of Southern California. Apparently the university in their old school way wanted me to have grades. And after a year of doing that, they kicked me out. So I was 19 years old and I realized, oh my God, my life is derailed. I am kicked out of college. I'm living 10,000 miles away from my family. I really screwed up. What's wrong with me? And the diagnosis I came up with was that my mind was out of control. And so I figured, okay, so how does one get their mind out of control? Which wasn't obvious to me. And sort of to shorten the story, I got into meditation practice. So I was 19 years old. I started meditating with a community, with a teacher. I got super, super involved. I moved into a residential community, a meditation community. Graduated from college, or got back into college, graduated college, went to work at 3M in sales, and went to work at Corning in marketing. And at some point I realized that my life now, so now was, 10, 12 years had gone by and I was fast rising in corporate, and I'd been now, practicing these meditation and spiritual traditions for a long time. And I was 31 years old and I said, I need to make a choice. Is it going to be, it's intense, right? Do I throw myself wholeheartedly into the spiritual practice or wholeheartedly into the corporate? And decided I was going to go wholeheartedly into the spiritual. So I abandoned the corporate. I quit my job, and I basically went out in the mountains and built a cabin and lived in the woods for a while to deepen my spiritual practice. It was an isolated cabin up in New Mexico. And I had this completely unexpected revelation when I was up in the mountains that my life would be richer and fuller, and my learning would be more complete with wife, children, and service to community. I was like, oh shit! Well, I should have known that before. Would have been really great information.
Yeah, before I built this dang cabin.
Before I built this dang cabin.
Outback.
That's damn straight. It had a 500-gallon catch tank for my water. It had a composting toilet for the bathroom. This thing, I was off the grid, and I was ready to be off the grid for a while. And it's like this deep insight came up saying, get back on the grid, buddy. And so I was very inspired to how do I do both, right? How can I engage deeply with people in the world of production and results and challenge and relationship, and continue to weave in this deeper aspiration towards unfolding the wholeness of what it means to be a human being, which is the same as a spiritual being. And so that's been 19 years, almost 20 years in the making of doing that. And that's why I describe my work as an unrelenting commitment to results with an unyielding regard for the human spirit. I have simply not been willing to give up on either.
Yeah,
right?
I love that.
And we can do amazing things, and at the same time, we can continue to unpack the fullness of who we are as humans, whatever that means. And I don't have doesn't have to be Buddhist or doesn't have to be Jewish, but there is a human quality that transcends the grind of production, right? And includes it.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to share the results of our survey. So it looks like that 36% I'm applying key principles and practices toward my purpose. 27% mentoring, I mentor others in their purpose path. Emerging, I'm connecting deeper with myself. So that gives you a bit of a sense of where the audience is.
Yeah, so a majority of folks who are applying embodying mentor, right? There's people who are really, wow, that makes me feel very delighted to be in this company.
Yeah, me too. So we'll go to the chat box in just a moment. And first, so of all the things you've done to enhance your consciousness, what would you say has had the greatest impact on developing your consciousness?
Oh, this reminds me of the brief conversation we had before we went on the air. Of all the things that I've done, what's had the greatest impact? Grinding.
Grinding.
Just the day in, day out, disciplined application of basic principles and practices. I think that, this is, you're now, right? I think that there are peak experiences and there are ordinary experiences. And we can grow tremendously without having any peak experiences. And we can have remarkable peak experiences without growing tremendously. And so I think that what has had the most impact is the day in, day out devotional practice. And by devotion, I don't literally mean a God, but by devotion, I mean, I heard this definition of devotion not that long ago. It really turned me on. Commitment is something that we do because we choose to do it at a conscious level, right? I'm committed. Devotion is something that we cannot not do, right? I cannot not do it. And so what's had the biggest impact for me is, somebody asked me the other day, why do you meditate? And right, I've just described, I've been practicing meditation for, this will be 32 years. So it's a long time. So why do I meditate? Because I'm a meditator. Period. Is it because I'm going to do this thing or that thing or this thing? I've had this thing and that thing. And at the end of the day, it's because the continuous practice, if it's yoga or meditation, if it's deep listening, if it's really compassionately engaging with your friends and loved ones and coworkers, if the practice is a practice of gratitude, if the practice is a practice of, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual, this notion of continuous practice, discipline, grind, the day in and day out, unsexy, unexciting, often boring, consistently challenging, is what's had the greatest impact. And I think that that kind of persistent, disciplined action builds neurophysiological channels and pathways that can actually contain the building wisdom. And I think without that constant grinding, disciplined approach, what happens is we can have an ecstatic or dramatic or peak experience, and it happens, but it has nowhere to settle into our physiology. It has nowhere to settle into our psychology. And so it eventually vanishes and becomes a memory. Oh, that one time in Boulder when we did that one thing was amazing. But has it shifted you as a human being? Daniel Goleman's new book, I love the title, The Altered Traits of Consciousness, because he says it's not important. It's not enough to have altered states of consciousness. It's altered traits of consciousness. How are you as a conscious being transformed? And I think that the wonderful peak experiences are delightful, delicious. I love them. But the most impactful thing I've done is the same boring old thing over and over and over, right? For me, it's meditation, there's yoga, there's ways that I'm engaging with my kids, with my wife, with my coworkers, the way I, breathe. I mean, these are just the disciplines of practice. I was sharing with you, I have this deep concern, a genuinely deep concern that we are transposing, that we are replacing discipline with ecstasy, right? And if we can just have an ecstatic experience and I've arrived, bullshit. You've arrived for a minute or a day or a week and then it fades. What doesn't fade is the shift that happens with repetition.
That feels so right to me. I'm not sure I've heard anyone put it quite the way you did. And so I've only been meditating, for the last couple of years. So I don't have that experience that you have. And I've exercised nearly every day for 35 years. That's my version of that. And I get what you're saying now. And so maybe there's kind of, gives me a way to frame, because like I can't not exercise. That's kind of where I am in my life. It's something I can't not do. And so that for me as kind of still, even a couple of years in, a novice meditator, that gives me hope that I can get there. So
not clear about the blind spot, but I am clear that courage can be cultivated and groomed. 100% yes, in my opinion. And courage begets courage, just like generosity begets generosity, and just like listening begets listening. And I think that the courage that, my definition of courage, and I write about this in my book and I write about this in other pieces, I describe courage very simply as walking toward what you'd rather run away from, right? And that can be physical, but more often it's emotional, mental, and relational. And so I think that there's three ways that I talk about, sort of the three-part practice of courage. that cultivates courage, right? And I talk about it as feel, face, and embrace. And what I mean by that is that the beginning of the cultivation of courage is to feel it. So fear, anxiety is a physical manifestation, right? Palpitating heart, or fast beating heart, sweaty palms, constricted neck and throat, pressure in the chest, butterflies in the stomach. I don't know, butterflies are so cute and fluffy. I've never felt it that way. But there's a physiology to it. So to me, the first act in courage is not to do something, but to get real still for a second and feel it completely. Because kind of like admitting the inevitability of death, feeling into the experience of the fear is already an act of courage.
So true.
And what it is about fear that is so aversive is the physiology of it, as well as the actual manifest relational experience. So what I am rejecting, what I'm getting away from when I'm not acting courageously, is I don't want to feel the fear. I don't want to feel the sensations in my palm and the stuckness in my throat. And so pausing for a moment to just breathe into it, don't dwell into it and make a weekend of it, but take 3 breaths, right? And in the space of 3 breaths, really embody it. By the way, that is an act of mindful practice. That's a mindful practice in itself. Feel. The second part in the cultivation of courage then is to face it. It's not doing anything yet. First, I'm really getting present to my experience. The second is I'm going to face it. When I face it, I'm turning towards that which I'm running away from, right? I haven't walked towards it yet, but I'm turning towards it. So what is it? To face it is to call it by its true name. Rejection, humiliation, failure, loss. Whatever that name is of that fear, right? So, but I get to face it because I've stopped long enough to feel it. If I feel it, I enter into relationship. When I face it, I enter into recognition. And now the third part is embrace. How do I move towards it, right? Embrace it. And I don't have any conversation around eliminating the fear or being fearless. What a wild concept, fearless. I don't know what that means. But embracing means I can move towards it 10%. And if you think about it, in every one of these stages, I've already practiced courage, because feeling it is an act of courage, facing it is an act of courage, and embracing it is an act of courage. And all three together allow me to stay in dynamic relationship with the experience rather than running away, hiding, and avoiding. And it's cultivated. And the more you do it, the easier it is to do, and the more obvious it gets what it is that is causing you to fear and how I can be more skillful with it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about jumping off of cliffs or, running with bulls in Pamplona. That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, why didn't you say that thing at the meeting? I'm talking about, you're a coach, and in your gut, you suddenly have this dropping sensation because your client said something that threatened you. But you need to come back to give this client some valuable reflection so that they can see that they've done it with you and they do it with their employees. And that's why they don't really speak up in a meeting. So where's the courage to rise up and serve, be life-centered, move out of the self-centered, oh shit, they just criticized me as a coach. What? Yes. Feel into that. Oh shit, they just criticized me as a coach. What? Feel the sensation. Let it for a moment claim what it is. I'm afraid of rejection. And then how do you softly, gently take 10% movement in that direction? Don't attack your client.
Yeah.
Don't capitulate to that story. So feel, face, and embrace is what I have practiced and teach and work with on a regular basis to continue to cultivate. I didn't use the word cultivate, but what was the word you used? Grow courage. Yeah. I find that if I can courage up with my clients and do something I've never done before, like try something new, like I don't even know if it's going to work, and I did this crazy I saw it done once, and then I did this chair exercise with my clients that's from near the coaching, where they're in a chair and they bring two other chairs, and one's their future and one's their past, and the chair they're sitting in, that one, right? That one. And and you talk to the chairs, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I feel like it's called, I felt so I find that when I can stumble and be awkward and
and in my way, courageous as a coach, you know, my clients then bring that part of themselves to our work too.
And
yeah.
it's important for me to make sure that in this conversation, courage is not a standalone function. Courage is with love, and courage is with wisdom. I think courage without love is often just destructive, and courage without wisdom is foolhardy. And so, if I, you know, the visual for me is sort of courage is in the hara, right? That's the gut, it's the rooted energy, and love is in the heart and in the chest, right? And wisdom is more in the head. So, for me, the idea is that courage comes up from the root and out through the heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that I have this discussion, right? I'm not really interested in coming from the heart as a human being. I'm interested in coming through the heart as a human being. And through the heart, I want to flow both my wisdom and my courage, right? I want the rooted energy that connects me to the ground and allows me to be bold and strong and steady. And I want the expansive energy of the crown that allows me to be creative and optional and multifaceted. And I want both of those to flow through this connected, caring space. And so to me, courage on its own is a missed opportunity, just like love on its own is a missed opportunity, and wisdom on its own is a missed opportunity. So as we talk about, can we cultivate courage? Yes. And bring the courage up through the heart, not as an attack to destroy, but as an energy that allows me to bring more to the person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Donna Singer asked a question about what is the relationship that we coaches need to have with our coachees to coach them into conscious leadership?
What is the relationship that we need to have with our coachees? Well, I think the relationship is, I think of why do people hire me to be their coach, right? They want me essentially to help them accelerate their ability to lead, right? I was just talking with a CEO that hired me, I guess it was Wednesday. We were on the phone as we were sort of finalizing, yes, we're going to do this together. And I said to him quite sincerely, I said, you know, Ryan, you are one seriously smart son of a gun, and you are, you know, very capable and very driven. My job at some level is to just cut years off of your developmental curve. You know, that's really the exchange that we can do, right? Is to get clearer and to get more honest and to get more effective. But essentially, I think that part of our role as coaches is to, at least for the people, the population I work with, they're going to get there anyway. These are smart, competent, driven folks. Mm-hmm. What I can help with is the acceleration component, right? Let's get there faster. And so there's so many directions that we can move in, right? There's so many things that depends on the person, the situation, the need. So I think at some level, I don't just want my clients to be more skilled, more competent. I want them to be more loving. I want them to be wiser, and I want them to be bolder. Not bolder so that they can be brash, but bolder so that they can not be stuck behind their fear. And the relationship with the coach, I think, is coach's instrument. Coach's instrument, right? I'm an instrument in this exchange. I'm not some kind of a blank mirror. The idea that I show up as some kind of a perfect mirror for them to look into and see themselves is, there's no evidence for that anywhere in science or history. We are human beings in a dynamic relationship. What can I do as a coach? I can practice my ass off to be present in my wisdom, to really cultivate my heart so I can understand what it's like to have big vision and big compassion and hold a lot of space for beautiful people of all different kinds. And I can practice being rooted to the ground and bold in my movement. And if I can do that as a coach, inevitably it is leaking into my coaching. Mm-hmm. That's what we can do for our clients. We can practice. We can be that. And then we can even teach them elements of it. But I think that if we don't practice and if we don't live into the capacity of being conscious leaders, conscious beings in our own right, there's a very different transmission that happens in the form of just words. Mm-hmm. Certainly, everyone can give my book and other books. There's lots of wonderful writing about it. I think what coaching does at writing can't is create a field of experience that is collective and collaborative. Mm-hmm. So what can we do as coaching? hold this as an intention, practice as an intention, teach it to other people. And just what we do as coaches, right? We set a plan, we help them navigate through it, we measure different elements of it and add this dimension.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, what's coming up for me, I'm reminded of a conversation I had this week with a client who I just did 360 feedback on. And his team is not, like, almost close to mutinous. And
Yeah.
he has such a different alternative image of himself. That's really very different.
Yeah.
Really, one of the hardest conversations I've had with a client, and what I felt helped me is we just have developed a deep relationship of acceptance, where I think I'm able to be as direct with him as I am because of how deeply I'm accepting I am of who he is. So I was just thinking about that in response to Donna's questions around what the kind of how the relationship we have with our coachees like impacts their development. And
I'm going to phrase this in my own model, Alison. Essentially, you have a lot of heart online, right? There's love. When you say deep respect and acceptance and connection, how's that distinguishable from love, right? Love is wanting to do well for others. Love is accepting others. Love is valuing the intrinsic nature of other, right? So you have this love connection, this love presence. And through that love, you could bring the boldness of action, right? You could have this difficult conversation where you're pressing and leaning in and really challenging him on his view of the world because you're coming through the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you're doing it in a way that is using data and analysis. And there's a logical way and a bold way that you've brought the two together coming through the heart. And there is I'm sure, quite an impact on him.
Yeah.
Quite an impact on him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we met, and I literally, this may not be very professional, but I started the conversation by saying, by tearing up and telling him it gave me no pleasure to hurt him. And by him seeing that, it just changed the entire quality of the conversation.
And what a beautiful, again, sort of example to the question that was asked about what can we do as coaches, right? You showed up as vulnerable. I had a mentor of mine years ago who said that if you want someone to talk about their brother, talk about your brother.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
And if you showed up in a vulnerable place, saying, clearly residing in your love and yet taking your courage to the step further, then it creates a dynamic that invites a mirror.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here's the money question that I imagine people have been wanting to ask is, like, how do we coach someone to be a more conscious leader? And not, I mean, and what I'm curious about is how much of that, of course, a portion of that is who and how we show up. But what I'm curious about is how if there's any of it that's kind of directive or prescriptive, like if there's like you talk with your clients about meditation, or is it just how you do what you do? So if you would, share, like, when you want to help your clients embody conscious leadership, what are you doing as a coach?
So there's a few things. In the article that I shared with you that you can share out is a brief glimpse into it, and I've got more work around that. But I describe it as sort of my blueprint to conscious leadership, right? So, and I've already described it as wisdom, love, and courage. So what I do with my clients is I do share with them the model, and we do talk through it, and then we talk about, well, and often it doesn't take much for a client to say, oh yeah, I'm totally tuned in here, but I'm totally not here, or I've got a little bit of this and not a lot of that. So the framework allows for a conversation to already unfold, and then we can find some focus. So for example, cultivating wisdom, and I have I think the article actually breaks down some of the subcategories. So for example, in wisdom, one of the things that we cultivate or we work on is mindfulness is one, perspective, so having multiple perspectives is one, and humor is one, right? So there's like three distinct pieces within wisdom that I found from a leadership perspective really make a difference to cultivate or activate that wisdom. But for example, just from on the call now, I describe wisdom as going below the surface and beyond the obvious, right? So that's my, it's not a existential definition. It's a very sort of blue collar definition, right? It's going below the surface and beyond the obvious. And so, okay, what does that mean? I can coach a leader to really awaken their slumbering curiosity, right? What happens often is that we get into a place of certainty. And now when I'm certain, I don't have to bring my wisdom, I just bring my habit of thought. But wisdom is going below the surface and beyond the obvious. So what else? What is here? So we can actually practice awakening curiosity, reawakening awe, right? Appreciation of things that are remarkable and not understandable. Because so much of our effort is to make it cognitively locked in and linear. So that's one way that I help people cultivate that is, let's get curious together. And this is how you can be curious. And these are the kind of questions you ask. And oh, by the way, as coaches, we are trained up the wazoo to be curious. So each of us as a coach already has the capacity to teach that to a leader. Because most, I don't know if I want to say most, in my experience, the majority of folks who have gotten to a senior role have forgotten to ask questions and have gotten really comfortable with giving a lot of insight, advice, and suggestions. So that's one layer of wisdom as an example. With love, one of the things that I work with my clients on an ongoing basis, and again, I describe love as wanting to do well for others. Well, how do you know what's well for others if you don't know the other? So one of the simple practices for cultivating love is, like Kelly does so beautifully, slow down long enough to understand what their interests and passions are, what their fears and dreams are. And so you combine a little bit of curiosity with this kind of pausing, right? Let me understand you. Let me feel you. Let me get to know you. And in that, now I can do well for you, right? Because if I don't know who you are, how can I help do what's well for you? It would just be my projection. So part of the love element is listening and taking the person in and really suspending my preset notions of who they are. And courage, by way of example, as walking towards something you'd rather run away from, I teach all my clients this feel, face, and embrace piece. I already described it. I'm not going to repeat it here, but each and every one of them, we get into this feel, face, and embrace, because everybody's triggered by fear all day long. That's just me, you, all of us. It's just a human experience. So when they learn that they can feel it, face it, and embrace it, they are immediately able to be more courageous. So, and there's lots of other examples, but those are like three really concrete, right? What can you do as a coach? Help them switch on their curiosity. Help them become better listeners, not for the purpose of closing the deal, but for the purpose of being loving and doing well, and help them step into cultivating their courage.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you, like early on in your relationship with them, you kind of share with them your model, and maybe there's a bit of education around these three components and what practicing each component can look like. Then it sounds like your coaches do a little bit of a self-diagnostic of like where they're strong and where they can develop more. And then it sounds like then that begins create a kind of a scope of work, or begins to kind of share where you're going to focus with them. And then how much of your work is just, they come to a session and what do you want to work on today? And you work with them through the lenses of wisdom, love, and courage? Or is there something more that you're giving them, giving them mini assignments to do? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the coaching for me is not curriculum driven, right? It's life driven, right? So what are they going through? I'm not showing up with a curriculum. I think that's more of a training. Mm-hmm. So it is the lenses you described, right? So I had a conversation with Chris yesterday, and the conversation was, we're moving into new offices. He's the co-founder of the business. should he get, it's only the CEO is going to get an office, should he get an office too? Great question. What does that mean politically? What is the optics of it? What does it mean from a power dynamic, et cetera, et cetera? So the question really became a question of love and courage, right? What is the expression of love, and what is the courageous action to take on more of a mantle of responsibility? And so the office thing is a situation, but we looked at it as in, why are you conflicted about it? He's in conflict. The conflict came down to sort of connection, relationship, and power and authority, which are quite frequent in most of my coaching conversations, right? And so it's not like we said, okay, we're going to address this, but rather, there's a framework, and it looked like love and courage were the two elements that we needed to sort of shine a light on in the context of what was going on. So it's always context driven. And then yes, the activity, the homework, the field work, I don't like the homework, but the field work is to, practice this and practice that in order to go deeper into the activity that you are doing as a leader, right? So not necessarily as a student of an ashram, but as a leader at work.
That's super helpful. Okay.